I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fire and Rain Conversation Series, a series designed to inform and empower bushfire-prone communities to live safely with fire. I'm Rachel Lopes and I'm here with Emma Ashton, and we're very excited about stepping into the world of art and artists today to explore the important role they can and do play in the bushfire and emergency management landscape. We acknowledge the Ma people of the land we're speaking from today and their deep and continuous connection with the land and with art. And we acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Hello and welcome to our fabulous guests today, Sarah Rowbottam and Gillian Brew. Jill, you're a local artist here in the Otways, founder of Studio Forrest, and you're also a community leader when it comes to preparing for fires each year in Forrest. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Sam.
And Sarah, welcome. You are lead producer for the Refuge project at Arts House at the City of Melbourne. That's been going for the past 5 years. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Emma.
Firstly to you, Sarah, can you tell us about the project and what you've been learning and the important role that art and artists play in emergencies?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Rowbottam. I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country in my house in Northcote. I'm actually currently sitting in my study and I'm surrounded by some ceramics and bottles and art. And what you can't see is that there's a skylight above me where I can see these beautiful clouds passing slowly across the sun on this really gorgeous spring day. I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation and the elders past, present and future, and sovereignty was never ceded. So Refuge has been a key project of Arts House since 2016, and it has explored the role artists and civic spaces play in preparing the community for climate crisis. And over the years, it's brought together people who don't normally collaborate in a crisis. So emergency services and frontline responders, such as the Red Cross and SES, community members, neighbourhood houses, traditional owners, artists, scientists, researchers, the local scouts, beekeepers, futurists, the list goes on, it's endless. And their task has been to identify what matters when the unthinkable becomes real, and what preparedness means in the face of disasters, and how survival is inextricably linked between the individual and the community and what role we can each play. So it's been a 5-year project and it's very long form, and there's been so many learnings and principles collectively developed over the year. We're in year 5 right now. So some of those principles have been honouring First Nations knowledges, listening to communities who have been most impacted, the importance of collaboration across sectors, and the role that artists can play in imagining alternative futures. But there's so many more, and we recently ran a workshop, and I'd like to share just a few from what came out of that with some of the people we work with. For local community member Lorna Hannon, the greatest learning has been the act of listening, and that great things can happen over a cuppa. And for artist Jen Ray, the importance of coming together and sharing different skills and knowledges to hold the messiness and the uncertainty. For Scotia Monkovich from Creative Recovery Network, it's been rethinking the notion of expertise and experts, whose knowledge is needed when. For Faye Bendrups, who's SES controller, the strength has come from being very community focused. And for me, it's been the generous time and foresight for many of the elders that have worked with us through Refuge over the years, Uncle Larry Walsh, Para Bernarda, Carolyn Briggs, Uncle Dave Wanden, Lorna Hannon. And while some of these people have been involved in Refuge from the beginning and others have just joined in year 5, we continue to build this collective knowledge together. And this growth was recently described by an artist we work with, Latai Tamapiao, as a wobbly board that we're all trying to keep balance on. And that kind of wobbly board has been such an amazing image for how our collective knowledge has come together over the years.
And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about how the project's been working. So the sorts of scenarios that you've been creating and how that's played out.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone here knows, and maybe some people who are listening in don't know, but all councils run kind of emergency crisis tests. And Refuge started by leaning into this idea of playing into the dark. But instead of replicating what emergency services do, they started focusing on what a creative approach might be in these scenario and exercise planning. So the first 2 years of Refuge in 2016 and 2017 was really modelled on looking at what an emergency exercise could be with a creative approach. And the public were invited to visit their local relief centre. So in 2016, we imagined a local flood in North Melbourne and transformed the town hall into a relief centre for 24 hours. There was a sleepover component as well. And in 2017, we envisaged the increasing possibility of 5 consecutive days of 40 degrees. In 2018, we examined a pandemic event and what would happen if the risk of contagion means you can't bring people together. In 2019, we looked at displacement prompted from climate crisis. And as we head into 2021, this hypothetical scenario is no longer. We're in a perpetual state of crisis and no longer preparing for one. So some of the questions that we're really asking right now is, what does it mean to be living in crisis ongoingly and the confluence of multiple crises? How can we start to share resources equally in times of hardship when worse comes to past? How can we focus our energy towards culture, spirituality, rituals, relationships? And one of the questions that our lead artist this year, Lataya Tumapiao, has been proposing is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? You know, is it standing in protest? Is it deep listening? And these are some really big and powerful questions that we are have been asking over the last 6 months in this pandemic, but are continuing to ask as we head into the final Refuge event.
Yeah, amazing. And they're all questions that we can all share, that as idea of figuring out what does the future hold for us all.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sarah. I love your description of the work you're doing, and I really love the idea of a wobbly board and that that idea of just practicing stuff and having a go and knowing that that's the space we're in and not having to be an expert. I really think that's a great concept that we could practice holding on to a bit more. Jill, is it a coincidence that we have a resident artist playing a lead role in the emergency preparedness space here in Forrest? And I guess, do you think art and artists could play more of a role in community resilience generally?
If it could have been seen as an accident, I think my involvement, I think it was more two areas of interest for me that have collided in a big way around the 2009 fires. So it started originally from a passion of mine to talk to the community about what was happening in the fire response area and how we could be better prepared as a community. And that kind of spilled over into, how I communicate. So I'm a graphic designer and I'm an artist as well. So communication is something that I do fairly naturally, and in doing that, I realised there were a lot of gaps between how the emergency services communicate with the community and how we could bring that together before an event to sort of make that an easier process and to allow the community to know what happens in the emergency services sectors a bit better so that they can understand what's happening and be a bit more prepared in a situation where, there's a lot of stuff going on, things are going a bit crazy, and, it's really important to have a bit of a grounding knowledge and know those people that are responding with you and understand what they're doing. So really for me, it was about communication and how artists and community can coexist with emergency services better. the ephemeral art project that Studio Forrest was going to run in conjunction with the Fire and Rain Summit is another example of how artists can collaborate. And that was more about getting people out into the environment. I mean, we live in a very high risk fire environment, so being actually out in it and seeing what's in that environment, taking note of you know, the ground cover and the trees and the leaves, and also producing artwork with that. It's kind of a really interesting way of communicating, you know, the importance of what surrounds us and how we react to that. Well, one of the things that happened to coexist at the same time as the 2009 fires is a fire festival that we'd actually started the year before. And originally the idea was about bringing our community together in the depths of winter when it's really cold and drizzly and miserable, and, you know, providing a warming sort of community event. But then that was in 2008, and of course in 2009 we were just devastated by what was happening in Victoria and in the country towns, in the towns that had been burnt out. So we really had to question what our role was and whether we were going to continue the fire festival and how that was going to look. And at the same time we started developing a relationship with the agencies. At that time it was DSE, now DELP, and they really came on board with a new strategy of trying to communicate with community in a different way, in a more conversational way, and asking the communities what they needed to know, what they wanted to know, rather than a sort of a top-down approach of, oh, you know, you need to do this. They were sort of coming into the communities and saying, well, what do you need to know about so that you can respond better? And as part of that, we decided that we would morph the 2009 event into a response that you know, really tried to capture you know, our sorrow for the communities that have been through this really tragic event and the people that have been affected, but also you know, give our community hope that, you know, give them the awareness that this could happen to us, but we could be prepared. We can, you know, learn from these events and learn how to respond better, and the services are there for us to help us through this process. And by making it an artistic event as well, with creative fire sculptures and fire twirling and the kids with the lantern parades, it really engaged the whole community in a way that not only, you know, talked about fire in that sort of disaster response, but also in the way that we've always lived with fire, and that fire is part of who we are and where we live in this community. So, you know, it can be an amazing resource as well. So, you know, with the planned burns and you know, things that happen around us here in Forrest, so that we can gain knowledge and in doing so become more resilient as a community.
Thanks, Jill. My kids have very strong memories and of the dragon, the fire-breathing dragon that you created that year, and I just loved the fire festival. It was an amazing way to help us think about fire in a different way and celebrate fire. It was really magical. So thank you for all that amazing hard work that went into it, but it really had a lasting impact on me and my boys and the family.
Yeah. So Sarah, just back to you. Jill touched on something that I think was one of the sort of impetus for the Refuge project, is that idea that a community-led response is far more effective than some of these more traditional top-down emergency structure responses that I guess is sometimes needed, but perhaps doesn't always address how community's feeling. Do you have some particularly successful examples of the projects you've been working on?
One of the projects that comes to mind at the moment is one led by an artist, Jen Ray. She's been working on a 2-year project called Raft, and it involves 5 Indigenous weavers, and she's been working with community groups from North Melbourne, Kensington, the Veni, a lot of the community houses. And her project really looks at what skills and resources and knowledges that might be overlooked or forgotten about. What are these skills and knowledges that we might need in the future in order to come together as a community? And the project has involved a series of workshops that look at skill sharing and building raft structures that have been co-designed with architects that have kind of histories in disaster-centric shelters. And I'm just like imagining back into last year, seeing in our main hall these amazing fierce women with machetes carving up 5-metre bamboo poles, standing side by side with people from the emergency services, and creating a kind of environment where you wouldn't necessarily encounter services in this way. It's almost like taking your uniform off. Another kind of project that comes to mind is one by artist Kate Thulin, who has a background in theatre, and she's been principally focused on the wisdom and creativity of young people and what they can bring to emergency preparedness. And through Kate's work, children and young people are seen as a resource with valuable offerings into emergency management rather than something to be managed. And her project in 2018 called In Case Of, she worked with a lot of students from St Joseph's Flexible Learning Centre, which is a school that's down the road from Arts House. And together they collectively designed and crafted kits and cubby houses and banners that explore preparedness, care, survival, resilience. And the project really emphasised micro-planning and the preparedness that young people, especially vulnerable young people, need on a daily level, and how they're actually offer so much knowledge and resource and expertise in this area. So some of the kind of, kits and things that people made had included music playlists that they might have on their phones if they needed to grab and go, comfort food that they might want. So things that may not pop up in a relief centre, but they've been thinking about that they might need to take with them if they needed to leave.
Yeah, what a fabulous example. And it's coming into that time of year where you think about your go bag. So Jill and Rach, we're getting to that time of year. So man, I think I'm definitely going to be packing some comfort food and my have my playlist up to date.
Yeah. We're going to take you into a different space now of kind of reimagining the future, if we can, 10 or 15 years time, where art and artists are a vital and valued part of all emergencies before, during and after an event. And if it was working really well, they're part of a diverse team of experts sharing their skills for the benefit of all. What would that look like? And if you could kind of paint the picture for us in a bit of detail of what you think that would look like if it was working really well.
It's such a big question, isn't it?
It is.
I guess, one of the things that I think about when I come back to Refuge, and what is remarkable about this project and what makes me think about what the future could look like, is that it really kind of interrogates and proposes these questions around how we can embed equity and access and dignity and justice in the work that we do. And, what more of a beautiful future is it that actually can be equitable and think about dignity and justice in these kinds of crisis situations? Because I think what we've seen in this pandemic in particular is that cracks in community become really amplified in disasters, and they can be unmanageable when power is centred in the hands of a few. And I can see a future where Refuge itself goes beyond just being a yearly project, and it's no longer a hypothetical scenario, that the learnings, philosophies is embedded across all the work we do, that artists are working alongside emergency services as artists, that they have a role to play in a relief centre, but also that community members have a greater sense of empowerment. They're called upon in their expertise to, respond to their own local issues. I can see artists being involved in scenario planning alongside council, and also really challenge and shift the way that those scenario plans are run with imagination, thinking about community involvement as well. I think, I think that the imagination that artists bring is so palpable to thinking about a future that looks at crisis management. And I think it's really exciting as well.
Me too. I think it has really opens up the possibilities, and to have a much more balanced and full understanding of where people are at and what's needed next. Jill, are you also able to share that vision, your vision for that scenario with us?
I have to say, what Sarah was saying just resonates, so intensely, because artists definitely have a role. Even now they have a role, and they hopefully will have more of a role into the future. And I can really see, well, one of the little projects that we're trying to develop at the moment is a ceramic project based around planned burns in our area. So we've got a couple of planned burns going to happen quite close to our town, and it's quite impactful when we have a planned burn in the town. There's lots of smoke, there's lots of emergency services in town. And we're working at the moment, we're talking to the agencies about developing a ceramic project where we have a pit fire close to or around the time that they're going to do the planned burn. So we prepare the fire with local artists and people, local community people, making things with clay and then popping it in the pit ready to be fired. And when they light the planned burn, we light the pit firing at the same time. So it's sort of this collaboration of the community being involved in the planned burn in a way that we haven't before, but also having a result from that and having a piece of artwork that you can hold in your hand and say, wow, this was created by fire. And, it's that engagement and that involvement of the community that I find really exciting. And Studio Forrest has always tried to work collaboratively with our community. And I think that we can do that in a way that engages the agencies as well. And as Sarah was saying, in the scenarios, artists think out of the box. So you just never quite know what's going to happen. And that's what happens in an emergency. You just never know what's going to happen. So you've got to be able to think on your feet and respond. And I think artists can do that really well. And I think that really brings something to the overall picture of how we respond in an emergency.
100% agree. There's some very linear thinking in emergency management and processes and systems. So we need a bit of the out of the box. We need a lot of out of the box to balance it all out. Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, so community resilience 101 for me, this is how we build that. It's so amazing that you're both able to share your thoughts with us today. So we always like to finish by asking our guests a final question, and that is around what gives you hope. So firstly to you, Jill, can you tell us what gives you hope?
I think the conversations we're having now, this is a really great example of that out of the box thinking that I was talking about before, about doing something creatively in response to, the pandemic that we didn't know we were going to have, and having to cancel the Fire and Rain Summit, and developing these conversations out of it, and giving us an opportunity to share our knowledge as well. So that continuing ability to create a new future, a new vision for emergency services and how we respond, and also for our communities. So yeah, I think it's inspiring that we're able to do that.
Yeah, all of us working together. That's really, really powerful. Sarah, tell us what gives you hope.
I really love Jill's hopeful message there. It's interesting thinking about hope and reflecting on it when you're in a stage 4 lockdown. And when I was taking a walk around the block this morning with my dog Izzy, I was thinking, what really gives me hope right now, and they're pretty small things. it's, you know, being able to keep connected to some of the people who matter most, especially through Refuge, and doing the occasional food delivery to Uncle Larry Walsh, or the regular phone call to Lorna Hannon. And it's spending more time in nature and being slow, being purposeful, but also being really unproductive and also being okay with that. I think I'm really hopeful that we move away from some of the structures that weren't working right now, and I hope that we move towards a future that is more equitable. I hope that we move to a future that is messy, that is playful, that is that centers creative thinking, that values the arts in not only emergency service and preparedness and response, but also across other industries as well. I think there's so much value from cross-industry collaboration, and I'm really hopeful that is a future that we can be walking into.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to both Jill and Sarah, it's just, it's really filled us with a sense that I think we are transitioning and moving into a different space, collectively understanding that we're going to face more frequent and intense events, and that's the only way we're going to get there is by talking about it together and reimagining the future. So thank you so much to both of you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, guys. If you'd like to know more about this topic and the projects that both Sarah and Jill were speaking of, you can go to our website at fireandrainconversations.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from today's episode, or for the conversation series more generally, please also get in touch via the website. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.
But I always thought that I'd see you